Welcome back. You're watching NewsX. I am Rishabh Gulati, and yes, the world is in tumult from North America across Europe. Not only have the wars that have been raging not yet concluded, but the tariff wars that have now ripped through the heart of the borders between the United States and Canada are also reflecting in the politics in Canada. Remember, because the tariff wars are not happening in isolation, they're happening in the midst of a leadership crisis in the Canadian establishment. The Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had announced a couple of months ago that he would be vacating his seat. That does not mean that elections are happening in Canada, but it does mean that there is a leadership battle and a replacement is expected to be sworn in shortly. And the best guess of all pundits seems to be that the replacement is going to be an individual called Marc Carney. Let's listen in to what he has said, particularly about India.
Is to diversify our trading relationships, and there's with like-minded countries, and there are opportunities to rebuild the relationships with India. There needs to be a shared sense of values around that commercial relationship, and if I am Prime Minister, I look forward to the opportunity to build that. Thank you.
Okay, now a few weeks ago, the conversation in the India-Canada Association was more than hostile. Let's assume that it was the worst we've ever seen. Now, there is a leadership change that's taking place. There's an election that is now due, and within that is the huge umbrella of the tariff wars and the extreme patriotic, more than understandable reactions of the Canadians to what they perceive as aggrandizement and insults coming in from the south of their border. Let's pick up this conversation. Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor is joining us on the broadcast. Daniel Boardman is joining us on the broadcast as well. Sumit Peer and Adit Kotari with us as well. Daniel, let me begin with you so that we can understand the basis of what's going on. Everything that we are hearing in other parts of the world is Canadians in general are very, very upset with what has been said and done from the south of the border. Is that a general assessment?
Yeah, that's fair to say. The anti-Trump push from Canada is pretty high, and understandably so. I mean, he's been threatening the country with, potential annexation, and then a trade war, and then, musing that like the British North America Treaty isn't valid, orders aren't valid. Now, you could say a lot of this is just classic, Trump destabilization to get what he wants in a trade negotiation, but no one really knows what he wants. He wants, fentanyl to be reduced, and that's fine. But, like, the fentanyl problem is more of a general organized crime and terrorism problem. Like, I understand why the Americans have problems with Canada. I truly do. It's very much related to why India has problems with Canada and all the supposed nonsense that we allow to go on in our security establishments, at our border, all across the system, right? It's the ideological corruption from China, from hostile foreign powers and ideologies run rampant through Canada presents a national security risk to America. Okay, I get that. But that has not been articulated clearly from the American side. So it leaves a lot of Canadians sort of confused as to what Trump wants because, only 1% of illegal fentanyl is being seized at the Canadian border. Now, that's a manipulated step from the Canadian side because it relies on our law enforcement, which is, again, corrupted to provide that data. So you have all of this, but Donald Trump has done a really, 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 really terrible job of managing the U.S.-Canada relations.
Or Daniel, it could be argued that he's done a very good job of uniting the Canadians, because if you and I had a conversation a month ago, Justin Trudeau seemed to be in trouble. There was a housing crisis, an immigration crisis, an economic crisis, forget diplomatic crises that were otherwise prevailing with countries such as where I'm sitting. Is this affecting the politics in Canada? Is it obvious that there is a political impact of this?
And it's very bad for Trump. The political impact is horrible for Trump. So if we're saying Trump, listen, I've put out and said, yeah, do I like that Canada's now kind of come together? It's nice because 15 minutes ago, before Trump was president, Canada, according to our leadership, was a racist, post-colonial, not post-national state that has no core identity, that is not a good country. It's multicultural. Mozambique, Canada, Chad, the Congo, Brazil, Bangladesh, all these things are equal, right? So what's even the point of Canada? Now that Trump has said, okay, well, then I'll take it. Now Canada's a good country again. So there is a unity, but that unity is sort of pushing behind his enemies in the Liberal Party. Had he kept his mouth shut, the most unpopular government in all of Canadian history would have been obliterated. He would have got a much more friendly and reasonable government that he could have, done deals with, and he would have been able to sort of put backdoor pressure on a Conservative Party to clean up a lot of these issues, and would have gotten pretty much everything he wanted, and both countries would have sort of increased trade and reduced crime and terrorism, and he would have got a win that way. But because he's been opening his mouth, it's going to be very, very, very hard for the next government.
Okay, so for people watching the broadcast, we hosted the former Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper in India just last week, and he had very strong things to say about the current American administration position on these matters as well. He's made a very verbose speech, but in the end, Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, right, where Justin Trudeau was in trouble to the point that he announced his exit, that I'm done, I can't deal with this. And there'll have to be a change of guard before the Liberals can present themselves at the next election, in which they were expected to do badly. Now they're all talking in the same coin, and there seems to be something for Trudeau to hang on to.
Well, Justin Trudeau was an unmitigated disaster for Canada-US relations, for Canada-India relations, for Canadian relations with most of the world, except for a few countries like China. And I think his going away is a great relief and, a sense of hope and expectation for Canada and for the whole world from Canada. So it's a very good change which is happening currently. It's a temporary change. And Marc Carney, who's expected to lead the country towards the next phase, which the elections will be held in the near future, is a banker, is a person who's dealt with finance very solidly before. Canada is also in economic problems, so he has been a central banker, governor of the central bank. So he has those credentials, and he may have said something about Donald Trump, but there are a lot of other people who have said that. And the Canadian relations with the US are, of course, the most important relations for Canada as compared to any other country in the world. They share a large border, and the maximum amount of imports into Canada from the US, the largest exports are into the US. The maximum, migration both ways is with the US. So even there's daily people crossing the borders to work in the other countries. So they have to have very good relations with the US. And whoever comes in as the next regular Prime Minister later will work towards that very, very solidly.
But Ambassador Kapoor, there's a practicality of it. But right now, everything from Jack Daniels to everything else is being pulled off Canadian shelves. Now it's patriotic, and I can empathize with Canadians on that point of time, that they are pretty upset with what's been said. Now we can be intelligent enough to understand that what is being said is just rhetoric. It's a negotiating stance. It's a position. Obviously, it's not going to be as bad as that, and things will settle down in a couple of weeks. But in the interim couple of weeks, has this been a fillip for the Liberals in Canada?
Well, yes, of course, it has given some shot in the arm to the Canadians, because when the president of US starts speaking about making Canada the 51st state, whoever is in power at that point of time in Canada is going to benefit, and whichever party is ruling at that time is going to benefit to some extent. Now, how long this will last is to be seen, because the antipathy towards the Liberals and towards Trudeau in particular is so high that I don't think it will carry them very far before the elections come.
Yeah,
of
maybe,
course,
but
national issues will.
Yeah, Justin Trudeau's got something else to talk about, and there is nothing that's better for a politician is to have an emotive subject making you forget about the other trials and tribulations of daily life. Let me get Sumit into this conversation. Sumit, so Donald Trump, it seems to have ironically gifted Justin Trudeau just what he needed, a distraction from his own record as he exits what has been a difficult premiership rather unceremoniously.
Rishabh, thanks for having me on your show. Well, I want to put a couple of facts in perspective so that we can take this conversation logically. The first thing is that it is all about your relation with China. It is not about the relation between America and Canada. It's not the Trump and versus Justin Trudeau. It is fentanyl is the center point of everything. It is the uncontrolled Chinese immigration through Canada. That's the center point of everything. It is the 70,000 military-aged men who are infiltrated into America, mostly through Canada and Mexico. That is the center point. And Justin Trudeau decided to do nothing about it. And what Prime Minister Trudeau is talking about is 1% fentanyl legally caught. Let me remind him. 2 months back, British Columbia, the biggest ever drug factory in the world, was caught in British Columbia, in Canada, under his nose. Gaganpreet Singh Randhawa was the person, Canadian citizen, who was running it. 450 kilograms of fentanyl was found. The fentanyl was so much you could kill each American twice with that amount of fentanyl. That is the quantum of fentanyl going into America. 400 people are dying every day with fentanyl coming from Mexico and Canada.
But Sumit, this is the point. No, but isn't this the point that in the rhetoric, which is then being perceived reasonably so as insulting, right? Your 51st state. Yeah. That in the rhetoric, the real issues of Justin Trudeau, which you and I have been discussing for years because they're real ones, they exist. And we are not discussing, the China funding of the Liberal Party. We are not discussing what they're doing with the Khalistanis raising a paramilitary force in Canada. We're not discussing any of this. We are discussing Canadian pride, and Canadian pride is the distraction that Justin Trudeau needed. Perhaps so much so that it could affect the next election, and maybe Pierre Poilievre is in more trouble than we can imagine.
Look, Rishabhji, it's going to be a temporary relief, but eventually things will settle. I'll tell you another thing. 90% of Canada, whatever it exports, goes to United States of America. You have a trade surplus with the Americans, and you have a $60 billion trade deficit with Chinese. Not only that, you are not pumping your oil petroleum production because you want to help Saudis and you want to help Russians there. You want to help China there. All the Chinese have moved their manufacturing to Canada to avoid that 25% tariff which Donald Trump put on them. They smartly moved to Canada, and Canada is facilitating that. The influence of Canada, which Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh bought over because of personal favors or whatever, that is what is impacting him. And how much does US spend on Canada every year? Few $100 billion for their security and few $100 billion for their subsidy. That's why Trump told, if I'm giving you so much of around $1 trillion a year a gift, why don't you become
Okay, but in practicality, Sumit, you and I certainly are people who cannot discount the importance of both pride and prejudice. They do matter. They matter in policy. They matter in economics. So let me get Adit into this. Adit, now the conversation in Canada is about across party lines, bipartisan, from mayors to their equivalent of governors to the Prime Minister to opposition leaders. They're all bashing Trump. Donald Trump has managed to unite the Canadians at a time when the Prime Minister of Canada was about to see an unceremonious exit. He's pretty much resigning. It's a deferred resignation is what he's done, which is very humiliating if a Prime Minister, if Donald Trump was resigning or Joe Biden had to resign or some other Prime Minister had to resign, it's pretty embarrassing for the incumbent government. So that's the situation, but everybody is now distracted with other things. Have we forgiven in Canada Justin Trudeau?
I don't think Justin Trudeau is going to be forgiven so easily. I mean, especially when you look at the housing crisis and the dire economic conditions that he's actually pushed people into. So I think that aspect of it, I think, is not going to fade away very easily. Yes, the argument can be that whether or not will he be forgiven to a certain extent on the cost of what Trump has now caused as a consequence of uniting everybody, all of the polity, all of the people in Canada. But Rishabh, because you invoked Prime Minister Harper, a few minutes ago, the one thing that he mentioned in his speech, he said Donald Trump is a very inward-looking fellow. So he is looking at everything from a very American perspective, from his own electoral perspective, rather than thinking about what happens in Canadian politics. Yes, I mean we shouldn't be letting Justin Trudeau off, especially us sitting in India, the kind of dire situations he's thrown the Indo-Canadian relations into. It's actually not befitting to see him go away scot-free and have absolutely no consequences from that perspective. I completely agree with that. But from a purely American perspective, he is playing to the gallery. He has his own electorate to sort of tell them that these are the steps.
Yeah, fair enough. But my question was a bit different. Are we going to hold Justin Trudeau to reckoning when it comes to our opinion, Canadian opinion, and the Canadian electorate, or is then the next election basically going to be about America?
No, but people do have these, short-term memory, and people go into these amnesias anyways. All of the things that Justin Trudeau has put Canada into, despite everything, he still got elected, with I wouldn't say overwhelming majority, but yet he was able to engineer a sort of coalition to put him back into power. So, the people have certain sort of amnesia when it comes to Justin Trudeau, just because he's got a pretty face and he's got a certain gift of the gab, whereas he sounds more convincing than the other person. At this point of time, Pierre Poilievre himself is not sounding much different to what a radical left would sound. So how does an average Canadian differentiate between a Pierre Poilievre and a Justin Trudeau?
Okay, so for people watching the broadcast, if you've not exactly been following what's been happening in Canadian politics, from carbon taxes on petrol that you have to buy in Canada, to housing prices, to inflation, they've been very serious issues, and I'm not even talking about the other politically sensitive issues of what happened in the Indian schools over there. Very serious issues. That's what the conversation was. We all understand the conversation when there are global highlights, when the Canadian Parliament gives a standing ovation to a Nazi and things like that happen. But Justin Trudeau was not exiting this premiership on a high because he was going into retirement at a ripe old age. He was exiting the premiership because that was the only way his incumbent party, the Liberals, had a hope in hay that they could contest the next elections. He was in that much trouble. Now, he is the defender of Canadian sovereignty. So, let me get back into this conversation, because whether it's Gold or Bayliss or Freeland or indeed Mike Carney, the question then remains is this impacting Daniel Boardman? Regardless of who now becomes the next Prime Minister for the intervening period, is it bad news for Pierre Poilievre? Have they got enough to work with to turn the tide, which should have been a one-sided election?
Yeah, I mean, it's not good for Poilievre. Listen, the Conservative Party of Canada, the party I will be voting for, I said this about them. They are the world's best losers. They are excellent losers. They are high-class losers. They are elite losers. They are fantastic at losing. They try and lose, but they can lose, and when they get their mind to losing, which they're always thinking of losing, they lose in the most controlled way possible. It's a soft loss, so there's not too much heat put on them. Like, they're really, really, really good at losing. That's how Justin Trudeau won the second and third elections. The first one, he came to big waves, sunny ways, new, fresh face. But the Andrew Scheer elections was like, classic Conservative Canada Party playbook. Okay, how do you run an election? Okay, load gun, point at foot, pull trigger. That's the Conservative electoral strategy. So that was Andrew Scheer's strategy. And then they went to Aaron O'Toole, who did I'm going to run on the exact same platform as the Liberals, but I'm just going to say I'm going to do what Justin Trudeau does, but in a more professional way. And people don't vote for Diet Coke. If they want to drink Coke, they drink Coke. They don't drink Diet Coke, electorally speaking. So the Conservatives are fantastic losers. The whole party is filled with losers, top to bottom. Now, the biggest losers in the party are the unelected class. So the Jenny Burns, the people controlling Poilievre. So you always see this in Conservatives. The guy wins the Conservative leadership race. You're like, this guy has something to him. Poilievre probably the most. Then they get into the Conservative system, and then they start saying, okay, we need to look at the polls and the focus group, because the Conservatives do all this data stuff. They always try and look at the data. Now, the biggest problem is the data in Canada is absolutely corrupted. It's designed by the Liberals, paid for by the Liberals, run by Liberal insiders. So the very data they're looking at is corrupted to the start. So take that out. It makes them sound like robots, right? Which was Poilievre's best-selling tactic, is he could actually speak in plain English about complicated topics and convince people on things.
Yes.
This has gone away in terms of the Conservative Party because they're doing data and research, and it's just all he can say is carbon tax Carney, carbon tax Christia is going to carbon tax just like he can't speak English anymore. And it's so frustrating.
Okay, it's difficult. It's a difficult one. The reason it's difficult is because, of course, you have to stand up to the Americans because Canadians are upset about what is being said. In practice, we know nothing is going to come of it. It's not, Canada and America aren't going to war, they're not going to cut their diplomatic or economic ties. It's not going to happen. It's rhetoric, it's ugly rhetoric, it will die down, but some damage will be done in the course of it dying down. So let me get Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor in. Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, how does that change? Daniel, finish your thought quickly, please.
Small mistake.
Yeah,
Just quickly,
yeah,
when you
go
said
ahead.
that we're loved by China, China also put tariffs on us. So yes, we're bending over to China. Everything you said about China is right, but China, even though we're capitulating to them
For
fully,
people watching, China has just responded to tariffs on electric vehicles, aluminium and steel by imposing between 25% to 100% import duties on Canadian products. Let me get Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor back into this conversation. Ambassador Kapoor, how does this affect the difference in the India-US relationship? Are we just assuming that the Canadians are going to be too busy sorting out their stuff with the United States, that this association, which has been so bitter, I can't explain to you how practically ugly it has become. Just try to get a transit visa to, via Toronto to Washington, and you'll realize how bad India and Canada are right now. Does it affect us?
Yes, of course, it will impact our relations with Canada and US together also jointly, because all the free reign which these K group, the Khalisani group terrorists, the Canadian terrorists were having till recently, will be curtailed to a very great extent, whichever the leader comes into power, because the US is also going to support that aspect. So the relations with US are going to impact Canada, because India's relations with US are going to become better and better on most issues, except I guess trade and tariffs aspect, which will be dealt with separately as a separate issue and not as a mainstream issue. So to that extent, Canada will have to now adjust its lens on India and make sure that it does not irritate India to a great extent as it has been doing so many years in the past. So I think it will be a good thing for India to then get on to more positive discussions with Canada on all the issues which have been kept pending for such a long time now. Back to you, Rishabh.
I don't see. Sumit, do we see it changing? Because the logical course of event could have been that, okay, the Donald Trump administration in the US no longer has any interest in all this Khalistani, Break India, George Soros, all these. So that part is now cleared. So obviously the Canadians weren't doing this without some pretty implicit US support or even egging on. So on
Correct.
that side of the border, all this nonsense is gone. But on the India-Canadian relationship, if there was a chance that, okay, even if it's a liberal prime minister, let's say a Carney or a Freeland or somebody comes over for a few months and potentially the government change, there was a chance at resetting. Is that chance still there?
I think, Rishabhji, the point here is that the Canadians have to wake up and smell coffee. I like what Daniel said between Coke and Diet Coke. Canada needs a leader who is talking about Coke and soup. Coke and Diet Coke will not do. You need somebody who talks something totally different and comes with a way out. This temporary euphoria and this hysteria we were seen in the European Union with Keir Starmer, Macron and the Germans and the Italians rallying behind Zelensky, but in 2 days it fiddled out like a house of cards. It was ice cream in the hot sun, it just started melting. So these things will melt in due course of time, but they have to realize that there's a new formation wherein America, India and Russia are getting together. In this new formation, China is the odd man out and everybody has to align to this formation and see where do they fit in this scheme of things. Because breaking away from India and America is going to hurt Canada in the long run. You don't need a leader who writes on the hysteria. You need a leader who thinks of the people and the future generations of Canadians. Hysteria might be a cricket match kind of a euphoria which dies in 24 hours or 36 hours. See what happens to Zelensky hysteria. The European Union is getting together. Oh, France offering, I'll give my nuclear umbrella to whole of Europe. What happened to that? Keir Starmer saying, I'll send my troops. They all literally chickened out in 48 hours. And Zelensky saying, I'm not going to sign any deals now. He's ready to sign anything and everything. The thing is that, is there a Canadian leader who can look at the global footprint and make a strategy which might be a better pill and realize the importance of India and the relations with India and America in the bigger scheme of things and for the betterment of Canada.
Okay, so
if they realize they don't, they pay for it.
Okay, I mean, they've not started withdrawing ambassadors from each other yet, so that's a good thing. But Adit, I'll leave the last word with you. So in terms of rhetoric, it is really ugly. It might become substantively ugly as well if the tariffs actually are unpaused and actually come into effect, that will become very real, because it affects the travel of people or travel of goods, which becomes very real for people, people like you and me. Where in this does the India-Canada picking up the strings from where we left off fit in?
So I think, we've all seen Marc Carney's statement on India as well. He looks at it from a very businessman kind of a perspective. He wants to improve relations between India and Canada. But what we also can't be drawn away from is the reality of how the Liberal Party basically functions. Omar Aziz was one of the foreign policy advisors to Justin Trudeau. I think it was in 2019. He basically said that the Liberal Party basically works in a way where they are so heavily influenced by the so-called Khalistani politics that all of the decision making is basically influenced by that particular aspect. So the question now basically remains is, when Marc Carney does assume power tomorrow, does he actually buckle down to that pressure of the Khalistani cahoots within the government, within the policy making, etc., or does he actually carve out his own journey?
Can I make one small point?
Go ahead, Sumit.
I think, what I'm making a prediction here that I think Mr. Carney has time up to 24th March. He's going to dissolve the parliament so that he doesn't have to face the opposition at all. He will carry on his few months. The elections will be only preponed to spring. That is what his strategy is going to be, because
Fair enough.
the opposition is not going to let him be in an unelected prime minister running the office of prime minister. He doesn't want to face the situation. So his deadline is 24th March. He will do whatever he has to do before 24th March.
Is it going to be a lame duck premiership? Of course, it's going to be a lame duck premiership. Everybody knows it's going to be. I can tell you from 10,000 miles away, it's going to be a lame duck premiership. But there are realities on the ground. Realities are that if you're a Canadian and you're upset with the rhetoric coming from America, I totally empathize. It's pretty irritating. It would upset the imagination. It would boil some blood. Is it actually in substance damaging? Probably not. Hopefully not. Does that mean Justin Trudeau is forgiven and forgotten? I'm hoping not. See you in a minute.